Welcome back to the podcast. I'm your host, Jeremy Miller. Every week, I chat with fascinating people from all walks of life in order to bring you knowledge, inspiration, and insight. If you enjoy the show, you can support it by subscribing, leaving a review, and sharing it with a friend. This is the Jeremy Miller Podcast. All right, Jeff Browning, welcome to the podcast, dude. Super excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Man, so I ran the Bighorn 50 this last summer, the 50 miler, and I heard about you. I kind of known about you a little bit, but after that race, I heard that you won the whole thing, and I was like, who is this Jeff Browning guy? I heard that you're like 52 years old, you're out here winning 100-mile races still, and so I was like, I gotta learn more about this guy. So I started doing some research, and I'm like, holy shit, how did I not know about, again, I heard about you, but how did I know about all the things you've done? And so I started looking into like all your accomplishments, and I was like, oh my gosh, this guy is a freaking beast. I really want to chat with him and connect with him, and here we are. So I'm glad to be chatting with you today.
Well, I'm glad to be here today, and what'd you think of Bighorn?
Dude, so epic. I'm from Wyoming, so I'm a little biased because it's kind of a hometown race for me, but so muddy.
That was my fifth time at Bighorn, and it's never been that muddy. I mean, it's always been muddy sections, but never been that consistently muddy the whole course.
Really? Okay, that makes me feel a little bit better. This is my second year doing it, and it was definitely muddier than it was last year. Last year we had some snow, so all the snow hadn't quite melted, which probably resulted in less mud. But what do you think of the mud? Like, do you embrace it? Are you like, God, this freaking mud? Like, what's your approach on it?
Oh no, I definitely stay in a good mindset about it. You have to, or else it will get in your head. And then that gets into your performance. So you just kind of have to embrace whatever the conditions are in a trail race and just go with it. I mean, I cut my teeth. I started ultra running in 2001 in Bend, Oregon. I lived in Bend for 17 years. And so I cut my teeth in the spring races on the other side of the mountains, on the rainy side. So a lot of mud races where you're just dealing with like sloppy conditions. And so, I just try to tap into that.
I love that. Yeah, I mean, it seems like obviously with 100 milers, the mindset and the perspective is everything, right? I mean, I haven't run 100 miles myself, but through my marathons and other ultras, and then like everybody I know that runs hundreds, it's like that mindset's kind of trumps everything else, right?
Yeah. You definitely gotta feed the positive thoughts and not feed the negative thoughts.
Yeah,
because there's negative thoughts always come in trying to, raise their ugly heads, but you kind of have to push them down.
Now that you've done a number of these things, do you have like specific things that you tell yourself, like when those negative thoughts start to creep in, or like when you can tell you're starting to get down on yourself? Like, have you gotten past all that, or does that still happen to you, but you've just figured out ways to deal with it?
Yeah, it still happens, but I don't let it fester. So like, there's a kind of an analogy I coach with athletes that imagine your thoughts as seeds. There's positive seeds, negative seeds. Both want to sprout, both want to germinate, and what the water is your time. So you're watering them if you're spending time on them. It's a false reality to think you're not going to have negative thoughts during a long race like that, especially a 100-miler or 200-miler. It's going to happen, and you're going to have negative thoughts. The question is, which one are you going to water? So you have to decide to recognize it, that it's normal to have the thought, but then say, no, I'm not going to water you, and I'm not going to spend time on you. Well, then you need tools that are going to help you to water the positive. And I like to also visualize, the negative thoughts as like, viney thorns and thistles that are going to choke you out and pull you down. And the positive thoughts are like flowering fruit that the fruit is sweet. So you want to eat the sweet fruit. You don't want to get choked out. So you have to like water those positive thoughts. And whatever it is, sometimes you just need calories. Sometimes you need to look around and say, at least I'm not sitting in a cubicle right now, or whatever. Whatever works for you to get you out of that. But you have to be intentional, and you have to recognize the thought and then push that negative thought down and water the positive thought by spending time on positive thoughts, positive internal speak, even external positive speak, which there's been research on just speaking to yourself in third person, right? Like you're a coach to yourself, right? Where you're like, Jeff, you can do this, right? You got this. And so you, not I.
Interesting.
And there's some power behind that from a mental perspective. And I've had to do that during races before, especially if you're pushing. Like, for example, this year in Bighorn, since that came up, I mean, I was in second place when I left Dry Fork, so with like 18 to go, and I thought I was trying to just hold off third, which was a buddy of mine from Bozeman, who was just breathing down my neck. He was 10 minutes back, and I could see his light. And so I'm trying to hold on to second place, and as I'm pushing through second place in about mile 87, I see a light in front of me of someone hiking, and it ends up being Seth in the lead, and he kind of had a blow up. And so I was like, blew by him, and then you're like, wow, I have to keep pushing. So you're telling yourself, you can do this, come on, push, you can do this, keep pushing, and every time you want to let down, because you constantly want to let down, especially that late in a race, you want to slow down, you have to just kind of mind over matter and tell yourself you can't.
Dude, I love
like
that,
how
man.
bad you want it.
I love that. Have you always had like how long did it take you to kind of develop that mindset of like this idea of like these seeds and how much are you going to water them and what are you going to indulge in? Like, is that something you figured out just through time, or like how long did it take you to to kind of figure that out?
Well, I think I'm naturally super competitive and naturally would tap into the positive things, kind of the growth mindset idea of like, it's about the process, and it's like failure is a stepping stone to success, right? It's not like, and I never got caught up too much in the goals. I always like to focus on the process, the trajectory you're on. So always focusing on, you're like, okay, what am I doing this week? And the weekly things you do to get from point A to point B, right? In training. Whereas I never got caught up in I never had the post-race blues very often. Partially because I had 3 kids and a wife, and then all of a sudden my honeydew list is after I'm done with 100. So I got to I'm supposed to be resting. So my active recovery is like doing some kind of project, But so I didn't have time to be blue about it either. But also I'm quick to go on to the next thing. I'm quick to focus on the next thing, and whatever the focus is, that trajectory, and okay, well, I know I have a 2-week recovery phase, and then I'll worry about the other phase when I get there, So over time that developed, but also once I got into coaching, you spend a certain amount of time. You should, at least if you're a good coach, you should be like furthering your education and furthering your knowledge with reading and research and that kind of stuff. And so for me, I kind of got on a kick. I go on rabbit trails, and those I kind of like have to see them through. And one of them was like neuroscience and what happens when we have negative thoughts versus positive thoughts, and what it does with like sending proteins to a tree-like structure in your brain. And those branches get thicker and thicker the more you do that. But we have neuroplasticity, which we can unglue automated neural pathways by just being intentional and ungluing them and creating a new one over time. And that was really, for me, was a significant truth, that there's physical proteins when you are negative. I'd been in business for a long time. I'd been an entrepreneur and had my own graphic design business for 17 years before I was a coach. And I'd worked for advertising agencies and internet startups in my career. And one of the things you find out in an office setting is there's always the negative person at the water cooler. There's always that person and you realize that misery loves company, and other people that have that quote negative mindset of like dwell on the negative stuff in their life and the negative stuff at work, they all end up like feeding off of each other. And you have to, as a person in that place, if you don't want to go there, you can't get involved in that conversation. Mm-hmm. You walk away from the water cooler, right? And get out of there. Like, just get out of there. It's like toxic. And so it just gets you in trouble too, because then they end up talking about other coworkers and everything else, right? So you learn in a business setting that you need to surround yourself with the positive people in the office if you really want to succeed. And over time, you may not notice that at first, but over time, at least I did. I noticed that that's how it was. And I also was a art director, and I had to deal with the entire account executive staff, meaning every salesperson in there, and they were talking to the client, and I need them to relay certain things to the client, and every personality is different, so you have to learn everybody's personality and have to understand, like, how do I not necessarily manipulate, but how do I talk to this person a specific way to get what I need to be successful? It's totally different with, like, you know, let's say Jane Doe and John Doe, right? Like, Jane, I might have to talk to differently than John. And, you know, and what motivates Jane is going to totally not motivate John, and I have to talk to them differently in the office setting. It's the same in coaching too. When you're coaching ultra runners, you're trying to deal with someone's specific personality and trying to figure out what motivates them, what kind of internal speak do they have. You know, we talk about mindset in coaching because ultra running is all about mindset. Because you find out that you have a lot. The longer you're in the sport, the more you figure out you have glass ceilings that get broken, and then you have another glass ceiling that gets broken, and then you have another one, and you just keep breaking glass ceilings, and it's all in your head. You know, you have a block that won't let you pass a certain effort, or how long you think you can push, or how much discomfort you can handle, or whatever, right? That's why I love this sport.
I love that, dude. And that's the same exact reason I've started getting into it more and more. And what fascinates me so much is just the mindset, because it seems like, you know, the longer the race, the less like physically demanding it is in a way, because you're going slower, heart rate is lower, all that. Obviously it is physical, but it just requires more patience, requires more focus, more strategy, more planning, everything that kind of, you know, sits on the mental side of things. I love that though, man. Yeah. What got you into running? We'll just go like all the way back, I guess. I think you said like 2001 was when you first got into it. Did you play like sports growing up? Were you always athletic, or what kind of got you into this endeavor to begin with?
I grew up a farm in Missouri, west central Missouri, you know, just out of the Missouri River Valley. And so I grew up on a 700-acre kind of commercial farm. We had livestock. We had 700 acres of row crop, you know, like corn, soybeans, and wheat. What I call the devil today, corn, soybeans, and wheat from a nutritional perspective, and all of that in our food supply. It's freaking horrible. But you know, I grew up in that, and I ran everywhere. I lived on a gravel road 6 miles out of town. The closest neighbor was a mile away. If we wanted to play, we met at the creek, half mile in the middle. You know, we ran to the creek, and it was jumping over fences and running through a pasture where there was a bull that would chase you, and cutting through those parts of some woods, you know. And so it was always, you know, we were always off-road running growing up, you know, or running on the gravel road. My grandparents lived a quarter mile away, and running to up the gravel road to my grandparents' house to raid their freezer for ice cream, and then run back home on a hot summer day. And then I also grew up playing sports. My dad was a complete sports dad. Like, he lived and died sports, every sport. He watched baseball, he watched basketball, he watched football, he loved football. He was a booster in my high school football team from when I was a young age. We went to every game, out-of-town games, in-town games of high school football. I never missed a football game. And I ended up playing, you know, Nerf football behind the stands when I was young. And then by the time I was old enough, like 12 or 13, I was standing on the side, you know, on the fence on the sideline watching the game, learning it. And played football. My dad was flag football coach. He was my baseball coach. So I grew up with a dad who was a coach and lived it. He was a farmer, but he also just he did all the sports stuff. And he's super involved in sports. And we watched Monday Night Football. I mean, he was passing the Nerf at every commercial, the Nerf ball across we had a family room in a basement, like a big long basement room, with carpet and two big sofas, and he'd sit on one sofa on one end, and then as soon as a commercial hit, it'd be like 3 to 4 minutes of me running routes and diving into the sofa. I mean, I became an all-conference wide receiver because of it, you know. So I played football, both sides, cornerback, wide receiver, you know, kickoff return man, one of the kickoff return men. And and really was focused on football, but I did track and field, basketball, baseball, all-star pitcher or catcher and center fielder. And then, I just was so focused on football. I never saw that I actually had talent in running. I won the 800 meter in my senior year, our conference 800 meter. And so I was conference champ in the 800, but all my coaches were our football coaches. So if you wanted to start on Friday night in the fall, you went out for spring training. You went out for track. And so I was so focused on football that I didn't even think about running. And so I could have gone D1, D3 scholarship as a wide receiver, decided not to do that, decided to go to a bigger college, ended up at the University of Missouri, graduated from there where I met my wife. And I just got into mountain biking. Like I was an early adopter, like 93, I bought my first mountain bike. We started riding like horse trails. It was like cowboy time. There was no rules. And we just, we got into that. And then I was taking spring break trips to Colorado, or Moab. We did Tucson, Sedona, one year, just mountain biking single track. So we did a ton of just big, mountain bike rides where we do gravel loops and then go through a state park and connect single track and then ride. I mean, I was doing 40 mile bike rides on my mountain bike on gravel roads and single track by the time I was a junior, senior in college.
Jeez.
Worked at a bike shop. There was also a running shop, and that was really my introduction to marathons. I still didn't know anything about ultra marathons, but the owner of that shop had run 25 Bostons. And wow. He was like the running guy in the shop, and then everybody else was a bike guy. So we were all bike guys, but it was selling running shoes, like specialty running. We were the specialty running shop in Columbia, Missouri, where University of Missouri is. And so all the hardcore local runners came there, triathletes and everybody. I didn't know anything about them at the time, but it put a seed in my head to run a marathon. So I dabbled in some 5 and 10Ks for fun because of working at that shop, because we sponsored some stuff locally. And I didn't have a lot of money, and I was able to get some free entries because I worked at the shop. And so, again, we were sponsoring the events. So I jumped in some 5 and 10Ks, even a 10-miler, but they're all road runs. And then when I moved to Colorado after college, I was still mountain biking, and I started climbing, and then I was dabbling in trail running, but I was always running like 3 days a week. Like always like 20, 40 minutes. Even through college, I always went out and ran regularly and lifted weights. Like the combo of the two, and then mainly mountain biked. And I really mountain biked a ton when I was in Colorado, but once I moved to Oregon in 2000, 99, 2000, I started running a lot more, and I met a buddy who had just started dabbling. He'd run like 5 marathons, and he started dabbling in a 50K, and he introduced me to like Western States 100, and he had a documentary on VHS tape that we used to like get together for wine once a week and dinner. He was newly married, and I was fairly newly married, and so and our wives worked together, and so we got together once a week before we had kids, and we would just hang out. And I remember like hanging out, drinking wine, and like thinking, yeah, I think I want to do that. I heard this Western States thing, and so that's what really got me into ultras was the idea of running a 100-miler first. But I decided like, I probably should run a half marathon, 50K, 50-miler, 100K, 100-miler. So I kind of did the whole natural progression over about 2-year window. Probably the best thing that could ever happen is having a lottery back then. Mm-hmm. Because the lottery, I realized, wow, I can't just enter this race. I have to like qualify. Back then it was a 50-miler, now it's 100K. But it was like qualify for this race with a 50-mile ultra and then enter it in November to get in June. So it pushed me out to be able to do it, and which set me up for success because I needed experience, right? I needed to go I needed to go run a 50K. I needed to go run a 50-miler. I needed to go run a 100K and like make mistakes. So it set me up for success in my first 100. So it was actually a blessing in disguise.
Dude, what a cool freaking story, man. Growing up on a farm, helping the family grow all the stuff that you despise now. I think that's so ironic.
Only thing we grew that I don't despise is cattle, because I love to eat beef. But I like red meat, and we even had grass-fed cattle. My dad that was his hobby, was grass-fed cattle. So we always ate grass-fed cattle, but we also had a big, commercial pork operation, commercial hog operation, and a big commercial like crop operation, which are both, like, in my opinion, the problem with our food supply.
Yeah, dude, I want to dive into all the nutrition stuff in a little bit, but I love that story. Like, you're always outside, always doing stuff. That's crazy. I didn't realize that mountain biking, like, my dumb brain thinks that, mountain biking's been around forever, but it's like, it sounds like you were kind of one of the early people in it, which was awesome.
I mean, the production mountain bikes didn't hit the U.S. until 1986 or 87.
Wow.
So it was like 6 or 7 years into mountain biking becoming kind of a specific genre from road biking, that all of a sudden just showed up in like Marin, where it first started in like in the 80s, late 80s. And then all of a sudden it kind of did this blow up in the early 90s. We had three bike shops in town, and everyone was a mountain biker because we had trails. We had like 3 state parks where there's single track, and we had the Katy Trail and the MKT Trail, which were all like old rails to trails like projects. More recent, they'd just been built like within the last decade when I was in college. So we could ride from downtown Columbia and where the campus is. You could ride the MKT Trail all the way out to gravel roads that then would connect you into like all the state parks. So we could do big loops on our mountain bikes and never really be in traffic, which was really pretty sweet. We were kind of an off-road town that way.
Dang,
it's pretty cool.
That's amazing. Do you still mountain bike today as part of like cross training?
I do. Like I have a gravel bike, I have a road bike, I have a mountain bike. But I mainly use my gravel bike. I do have a mountain bike that I occasionally get out on, but I like to use my gravel bike as more of a bike to the trail commuter, or mix in adventures from the front door without having to drive to the trailhead. So like, for example, today I rode like 30 minutes, stashed my bike, ran an 8-mile trail loop, then was 5 minutes over to the gym, locked up my bike, lifted weights, and then biked about 13-minute commute back to my house. So it was kind of like a loop where I put the longest ride at the beginning before I ran, then it was just short commutes over to lift, and then short commute home. So I mix it into my training a lot.
Dude, that's amazing. It sounds like a great day. Is that pretty typical to do, like what you did today?
Yeah, I do a lot of you'll see bike mixed in to my Strava a lot in the summertime and when the weather's nice. I don't every day, but I do probably put a couple hours of time on the bike a week, nice. Of commuting around and going to different trailheads. A lot of times, like, I have trails, 20-minute run from my house, I can be on trails, but sometimes I'll skip that 20 minutes and ride and get farther into the woods just a little bit on my gravel bike, lock it up to a tree, and then just do a long, like a loop, like an hour and a half loop, and then like pedal home.
Are you in Flagstaff full time now?
Yeah, Flagstaff.
How do you like it there?
It's good. I mean, we have like good elevation. I live at my house is at 6,800 feet.
Nice.
The Coconino Plateau is hovers right around 7,000 feet, and then the San Francisco peaks go up to 12,600 at Humphreys.
Dang.
The main front side's up to about 9,200 at Eldon, which is part of the Cocodona course, and so that's right out our door. Like, that's 5-minute drive to the trailhead from my house. I can be on legit 2,000, 3,000 feet of vert.
Dude,
so it's good training ground. Yeah, and we have trails on all sides of town. We're kind of surrounded by national forest.
I've heard Flagstaff is epic. My running coach lives there. He does marathons. He's like an OTQ guy. He says he loves it out there. But how do you like that compared to like Bend, Oregon? Did you spend the majority of your time like during your career in Bend, or is the move to Flagstaff a little bit more recent?
Yeah, Flagstaff's only a little over 2 years. We kind of bounced around for a couple of years. We left Bend in 2017, and then we were in Logan, Utah for 2 years, Bozeman, Montana for 2 years. And then we ended up here. And mainly I was chasing, like, where's the best training ground weather? the combo of all of it. And at first we were trying to be in between Seattle and Kansas City, where my wife and my families are. Mine are in Kansas City still. Hers are all out in like Pacific Northwest. So we were trying to be in the middle, but then we realized, like, you know what? Let's quit messing around with like trying to be in the middle, and we just like, let's move somewhere we want to be, where the weather's good. And so that's how we ended up in Flagstaff.
How big of a difference do you think it makes where you live based on like training for mountainous hundreds? Obviously, like you want to be, I would imagine, at some sort of elevation with, similar trails that you're going to be racing on. Like, how big of an effect do you think that has? Because right now I live in Austin, Texas, and it's like, it's impossible to train for a mountainous 100 or a mountainous ultra down here. So I'm always curious, like, how big of an effect you really think it has?
I think it has a pretty big effect if you're if you're somewhere in that 5 to 8,000 foot range, you get a huge benefit. And the research really shows 6 to 8,000 feet is kind of the sweet spot for like having more red blood cells and changes to your hemoglobin and all that kind of stuff. So this is kind of like Flagstaff's in one of those kind of sweet spots, just like Durango's another one that's in that kind of that 6,000 foot plus sweet spot. And I think you do get benefit from 4 to 5,000 feet, and you can still do hard workouts. And even at this altitude, 6,800 feet, I can still do hard workouts. They're not as quality as they were when I lived in Bend, for example. You could do a lot harder work at 3,500
Right.
feet. But we can go down. We can go down to Sedona at 4,000 feet, and we can go down the Grand Canyon, which, it's the top of the Grand Canyon's the rim, so which we live on. So that's like 7,000 feet. So we go down in the Grand Canyon. So you get benefit from training lower in multiple circumstances, which is very unique to Flagstaff. There's not very many locations where you can go lower, live high, train low type of scenario. But there's definitely benefit if we look at physiology studies on altitude training and that kind of stuff. The 6 to 8,000 feet is kind of the sweet spot. So, you do get benefit, but on the other ones, but I think you get the most benefit from I definitely notice a difference living here in my performance, especially if I go down or if I go do mountain races. Most mountain races, Rockies, Wasatch Range, Bear River Range, they're all going to be somewhere in that like 4,000, 5,000 feet at the lowest, and then like maybe 9 or 10 at the highest. Unless you're doing something unique like, Hard Rock or High Lonesome or something like that, where it's like a lot higher altitude, then that's a different scenario. But for most mountain races, living where I am, it's like right in the middle of that altitude. And so I train up to their high point, and I live in the middle of their the median altitude of the race. So it definitely is a benefit, because back when I lived in Bend at 3,500 feet, you could tell when you showed up. Like I could tell when I hit 9 or 10,000 feet. If I was pushing, it feels like you got a governor on. But like living here, I go run at 10,000 feet. Like I train 9,000 feet all the time. So it doesn't really affect me when I hit those higher altitudes in these races, the high points of some of these mountain races now.
That makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Yeah, I had this one lady on the podcast a couple months ago, and she said that like she lived with elite marathon runners over in Ethiopia, and instead of like once a week, instead of just like doing a speed workout, they would sub that out for just like a higher elevation run. So it's crazy the effects that can have on your training and fitness and stuff. Do you know I think they're different sciences or different like metabolic effects, but like heat training, humidity training, as opposed to elevation training?
Well, heat training does do some effects to your red blood cell count. So you do get a benefit. So there is some benefit. It definitely is it's not gigantic, but it is a benefit, meaning you're getting some kind of an adaptation in red blood cell count to do heat training, and to hemoglobin, I think, too. So, to what extent, do you gain 1-2%? I don't know. I don't know what that number is exactly, but I do know that you do get benefit from heat training. So that is a strategy we employ if we have athletes who are, from lower altitude. We're doing some sauna sessions or hot yoga, stuff like that, where they can get some heat acclimation. So when they do go to altitude, hopefully they have a little more red blood cells than they would have.
That makes perfect sense. Okay. Yeah, I've been dying in this Texas heat, so I'm like,
You have to embrace it, man. You have to embrace the heat. The biggest thing with race one, you're always going to be like not be able to go as hard in the heat.
Right.
But if you take your easy days and go cruise and use a handheld and maybe some electrolyte pill, like Succeed caps or something like that, or using like Redmond Relight, like a replacement with it has no calories, where you just put that in your bottle, so you're getting electrolytes coming in with the water for absorption and like electrolyte balance, so you're not coming out of that workout way behind. Like I was just in New Orleans. I was a keynote speaker at a business conference, and I'm kind of dabbling a little bit of motivational speaking. And
nice.
One of the things that I embraced while I was there is one of the days. The day I gave my presentation was 8:00 in the morning, and then I was done. So I flew in for this hour presentation, did it, and then I had like all this free time, and I had to fly out the next day. So I spent the whole, like I waited till noon. I went and lifted in the air conditioning at their nice weight room at the Ritz that I was staying at. And then because they had a nice gym for a hotel. And then, it was down on Canal Street. So I ran down in like off the French Quarter at noon during a heat wave. It was so hot, man. But I mean, I was thinking like, one, I've got athletes who live in the Southeast and live in Austin and other places that are really hot. And I don't train in that all the time. We go down in the desert sometimes to get heat acclimation if we have a specific race coming up, but I don't go search it out. And so, unless we go to the Grand Canyon down in the bottom, it's really hot. But I just wanted to experience the humidity because we don't have the humidity here. And it's been so long since I lived in Missouri. It's been 30 years. So I was like, okay, I need to go feel what what it's like to train in this from all my athletes that I coach. And so I went and did an 11-mile run at noon, and it was freaking hot. I went through 3 half-liter handhelds. So I had one handheld, and I had some electrolyte pills with me. So Succeed caps, so like sodium and potassium. So I basically pop one of those for about every 400 milliliters I drink, and to keep the sodium ratio and everything going in with the drink rate. And so I ended up having to hit all these water fountains that were at parks, luckily, because I went through 1.5 liters in an hour and a half run. So I was drinking a liter an hour basically equivalent. And I had to take, and I even got back, man, and I had to take a nap. Like it wiped me out. Like I took a shower. I mean, obviously I didn't have a lot of I had the whole day to kill. And so I was like, well, I'm just going to take a 2:00 in the afternoon, 3:00 in the afternoon, 30-minute nap. And I felt better after I got that. I had to take a cold shower, try to get the core temperature down when I got back, was still down in a ton of water, went and bought, I didn't have enough electrolyte pills with me. So I ended up having to go to a Walgreens and buy noon and noon tablets so I could put it in my water. Because I was like, man, once you've been doing this 23 years and you've tinkered a lot, when you're dehydrated. Mm-hmm. And I need more electrolytes. I do not have enough liquid still. And so that whole afternoon, evening, I was just pounding noon tablets and water desperately so I wouldn't I could feel a headache on the verge, from dehydration. But it's interesting that you will adapt over 4 or 5 days of stimulus like that. If I would have stayed there another 4 or 5 days, I would have been feeling fine on those runs.
Have you ever done a sweat test? I did one of the Levelin ones a couple weeks ago, and I always knew I was a heavy sweater and a salty sweater, but my mind was blown. I was like, holy shit, I didn't realize that's how much sweat and salt I actually lose. Have you ever done one of those?
Yeah, I've done the precision hydration test, which was it's a patented medical test. Actually, one of the guys who coaches for me that I coach as well, Remo Spagnol, he is in Austin, and he's certified to do the precision hydration test. It's about a 45-minute test. They put a coil on your arm, and then you sweat into a tube, and then they extract that and put it through a machine. It's like a briefcase. They've patented it into a briefcase test. It used to be $3,000 or something at the hospital, but it was a medical test. But now it's $200 or $300. So So it's a really good one because what they found in testing over 10,000 people, that it's genetic. Like people's concentration of sodium in 1 liter of sweat does not change, even with training. So, and everyone's unique. So like the outliers that they've tested is like 200 milligrams per liter of sweat up to 2,400. And in my cohort of athletes, I have like 600 to 1,900. And I'm like 940. So I'm like kind of right in the middle. A 900 is like average. So it's really good to have that because then you know your unique sodium concentration you need to be replenishing per liter drink rate. And then the other piece of that, the way I play with it is just the home scale test. Weigh yourself with no clothes on, go for a 1 hour run, note the temperature and humidity, and then weigh yourself, towel off, you sweat, weigh with no clothes on again, don't pee, don't drink for 1 hour, and for that 1 hour run. And then whatever you lose is what you lose in those temperature and humidity, and you want to we chart. So I have athletes chart in a spreadsheet. So they get data points. And we might only start with 2 data points initially, but over time they might get 3 or 4 data points in different temperatures. And then we can extrapolate all the other temperatures, then get really close to what their drink rate should be. And that's really helpful. So when you go into a 100-miler, for example, you would go, okay, I'm going to night run, but I'm also going to day run in the hot heat of the day. So I need to look at the high forecast and the low forecast for the race course. And then I can guesstimate, in the morning when it's hot heating up and in the evening when it's cooling off, it's somewhere in the middle. So I can say, okay, here's my high drink rate, my low drink rate, and then I'm going to extrapolate in the middle temperatures as it's heating up or cooling down. And that's really helpful because then you're not overhydrating, but you're not underhydrating, depending on temperatures.
Interesting. I never knew that was genetic. I was wondering that after I did it. I was like, I wonder how much this is influenced by like my diet, how much I hydrated in the days leading up to the test. But it sounds like they basically found that that's almost 100% genetic, or it is 100% genetic.
The number really barely changes if you get tested all kinds of different times. So
interesting.
And I don't know how, I'm not familiar with the levels one, like how accurate it is. I just know that this precision hydration one was a medical grade test that they converted into a briefcase test. So it's still the same test as the medical test. It's just more convenient. They can come to your house with like a briefcase and a laptop.
Right. Damn, I got to check that one out. Especially because it sounds like that guy's here in Austin too. Because the level in one.
Yeah, he's in Austin. It'd be easy to hook up with him, man. I'll pass you his info.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, at mine, the Levelin said I was like 2,000 milligrams an hour, which I would believe it, but I'd love to like get a second opinion on it too.
2,000 milligrams of sodium.
Yeah,
that's really high.
Yeah, I'm like, I know I'm a salty
I'd
sweater.
like to see it tested with that medical grade test.
Yeah.
To see if it's actually that high. I bet it's not quite that high. I have seen a lot of guys over 1,000 and girls over 1,000. I've got multiple 1,500, 1,400, 1,200, multiple 1,100s, and a 1,950 is my highest.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was.
In my cohort of athletes.
Interesting. Yeah, I might need to get a second test done. We'll see. So let's go back. So your initial motivation to get into ultra running and hundreds was Western States. Bighorn was your first 100, right?
No, Western States was in 2002 was my first 100. Okay. Bighorn was my third 100.
Was Bighorn your first 100
win? I did Wasatch in 04. I did, what's that?
Was Bighorn your first 100 win? Maybe that's where I saw it?
Yeah, that was my first 100-mile win.
Okay.
Yeah, it was my third 100 and my first win.
Dang, that's nuts. The third 100 you ever did, and you freaking won the whole thing. At Bighorn, too. Like, one of the... As far as I know,
you got to remember, competition wasn't what it is today. Like at Bighorn this year, that winning time would have got me 4th or 5th, right?
Wow.
So that shows you like the progression of the sport too, in the last 15 years, right? Like the times I won, that came back in 06, got the course record. Which I ran with like a 20:24 to get a course record because the course record was like right around just under 21 hours. Broke the course record by maybe half an hour, if I remember right. I mean, I'm pulling this out of the archives here, so don't quote me. But yeah, I mean, that just shows you like, third place ran like a 20.5 this year.
Jeez.
Right? So even my course record year win would have still put me in third. this year, for example.
That's wild.
So
what was that?
in worse conditions too. So you could argue the '06 year when I ran 2024, the course was dry. Like it's the driest I'd ever seen it. It's the driest I've ever run it. And it was like you were just hammering like dry single track the whole time. Like there were couple little muddy sections, but they were literally like 10 feet or 15 feet, and then you're out of it. And it was dry trail. All the stuff up on top was dry. So
Dang.
it was like a different course. If we would have ran that this year, we would have probably run sub 19.
Jeez.
With a dry course. I mean, fighting that mud, it's so much power suck. And we were pushing hard. We would have run definitely way faster. The top 3 would have.
I'm really curious the like mindset and preparation and strategy that goes into a race for somebody like you who is going after course records, going after wins, as opposed to somebody like me who I'm just going out to finish. Like I don't really care what my time is. I don't care what place I get. I'm just trying to get the thing done. I'm curious like how your mindset might be different. So like, I mean, deep into a race or like even I guess before the race starts, like, are you going after a course record? Or are you going out to win? Like what's your strategy kind of look like there?
It depends on the race, and what the field looks like, So, I'll give you a contrast. Like I definitely wanted to win at Bighorn based on the field, but I knew it would be tough because there's 2 guys that I knew personally that were fast, and that are proven in 100-milers, meaning they're not newbies. They've have good performances, I mean, David Aiella has the I Am Tough course record. I think Seth Swanson might have a course record or 2 too. And he's been like second at Western States. And so I knew that it would be a tough to pull out a win there. Luckily I was able to. Sometimes you get gifts and you take them. And then, but like for Hard Rock, for example, there were 3 Euros coming. There was a pretty solid field there. I knew I would, I typically that has a deeper field. So usually I'm trying to just run the best time I can there and see where I end up. And usually I'm 4th or 5th there. So it just depends on the race. But mentally, I always prep for I always have splits. I always have, specific goal splits to run a specific time. And it's usually my A goal is always a little audacious, meaning I can imagine myself getting it, but I'm not going to get it very often, like maybe 10 or 20% of the time. Like if I nail it and everything goes really good and I'm on, then I'm going to get that time, or I've got a good shot at getting that time. But most of the time, then it's just like every sub 30 minutes, So let's say you're trying to run a 20 flat. Then the next one would be sub 20:30, then it'd be sub 21, then sub 21:30, right? That's my fallback plan. Those are my A, B, C goals. Plan B is just get under the next 30 minutes. And if you miss that, then it's the next 30 minutes, right? So that keeps me motivated to not mentally let down, even when you didn't get your goal. So that's how I've always kind of approached it. And then the other is just logistical planning before. Know the course, know where the hard parts are, visualize the course, visualize racing the course, meaning where are you going to push, where are you going to chill, how much are you going to chill, you're going to chill the first 50 miles, 60 miles, 70 miles, or is it first 50 miles and then push for a 50K from 50 to 80, or are you waiting till the last 50K to push? Depends on the difficulty of the course, the layout of the course, where all the big climbs are. Those are a lot of factors that factor into a kind of a race strategy up front, at least from my mind.
Yeah, that makes sense. Are you a spreadsheet runner, as they call them? Do you have timetables of okay, I got to be at this aid station by this time, run this pace to get there? Or are you kind of just I'll get there when I get there, I'm going to go based off of feel?
I do time. Time of day is the only thing I give myself. I do the name of the aid station. I do a chart, name of the aid station, the mileage, and the time of day to get there. And then and when I develop that, I then take those splits copy it to another tab in my spreadsheet, and create a big one that takes up a whole 8.5 by 11 sheet. And then I put notes next to like where drop bags are and where I'm going to see crew, and then all the gear that goes in the drop bag, and all the like nutrition information, like how many gels am I picking up at, mile 25 if I'm going to hit a drop bag and the crew's going to go get the drop bag. What are they going to give me out of that? And it's going to be like, 3 gels and 3 tailwinds, powders and electrolytes and whatever else that's in there. So that way I'm doing all the thinking up front and I'm not having to think during the race. And so, and it's, the last 6 or 7, 8 years of racing, the ante has gone up because the competition's steeper. And so you have to be more like a pit crew in a lot of races, where I used to just go off drop bags and still get wins. But now I mostly like use crew. Like some buddy will show up, ahead of time. I'll call him like 3 months out and say, hey, can you come crew for me this weekend? And I have a little kind of stable of like people I've used over the years that I trust that like to come and help, and they're all ultra runners too. So
that's awesome, dude. Yeah, dude, seeing some of those the crews, like as the elites, I'll just call it, I'll throw you in with the elites, obviously. When the elites are coming through, like they don't even stop. Like most people, they come in, sit down, have a snack, change out their shoes, they're chilling for a minute. You guys just you blow through. It's like literally a pit crew. Like you're grabbing water, grabbing it, and then you're out. It's like 30 seconds. But I mean, obviously you're racing, and so that's a whole different thing that goes into it. You don't even like really give yourself a chance to like take a rest, I guess. It's so impressive to watch.
Yeah, we just keep moving. We try to keep moving and minimize time at aid stations. Maybe a couple of key ones where you might sit for a second and you're doing something specific. Like a shoe change. Like in a 100-miler, I might do one shoe change, halfway, and shock shoe change. So that would be a sit down, that kind of thing. But most of the time, it's like, you literally, as I'm walking into the aid station, I'm like putting powder and electrolytes in one bottle, and getting the other flask out, and I already have that lid off, and I'm handing it to a volunteer, and they're filling that with water. As I'm putting the powder in the other one, then they're filling that with water, and then I'm putting caps back on, and then I'm like, might walk by the aid station table and grab one piece of fruit, and then I'm out. It's quick.
Are there do elites get pacers, or is it kind of like this like unsaid rule of like we don't use pacers because
No, you can use pacers. You don't have to. It's total choice. And it depends on the race. If you're racing in Europe, they don't allow pacers. Oh. So, but like, in the States we do. And part of that's because, they have 2,500 people at UTMB, right? So if you had pacers, you'd have 5,000 people on the course, right? So if everybody had a pacer. Whereas in the States, the biggest race might be 500 people in like a mountain race, and most of the time it's like under 300. So, you maybe only, if you double that, not everyone's going to have a pacer, you have maybe 500 people on the course, right? Instead of, have 2,500. So I don't use pacers very often, maybe a handful of times. I've used pacers in a 200, and when I did Moab 240, just it helps because you get so fatigued. It's nice to have somebody with you. But I do think in hundreds, they aren't really necessary. And I don't like them because it gives you someone to complain to. Like, human nature is, misery loves company. And so you're like, even if you don't like verbally say, oh, I'm hurting, you might sigh. If I'm by myself, I don't sigh. Right. I just buck up and I like suck it up. And I feel like when someone's there, it gives you like permission to complain a little bit and to let down mentally, because then they're helping you make decisions and all kinds of stuff. So I prefer to not do it. And I luckily inadvertently didn't have a pacer my first few races, or my first 100. I was supposed to run with a buddy, and his dad was an ultra runner, and we were like 29, 30. And so his dad was like in his 50s, and he was a long-time ultra runner, and he was like going to pace all of us as a group. But then my buddy was hurting and like throwing up, and I wasn't. which when you're not throwing up, someone else is like having a bad time. It's hard to be with that person in the race, especially when you're tired too. And so I just ran ahead of them and was like, you know what? If you guys catch me at an aid station, great, but I'm just going to run by myself. And I ended up running by myself, and I actually ended up liking it. And so I was just like, I like being by myself. It's kind of nice. And so then I kind of tried to pacer my second 100 and found that I complained. And then I did Bighorn without one. And then I won, and then I was like, you know what? I don't need a pacer. You know what I mean? That was like kind of solidified that I don't use pacers. I kind of became this like guy who's like, I was like Carl Meltzer, you don't need no freaking pacer. And so I didn't do pacers for years. And then every once in a while I would, a good buddy would want to jump in for 20 miles or something. And I would be like, yeah, that's cool. Because I knew him. It was always someone I knew really well. And so there was always it was kind of just like it was a nice little treat, because it wasn't that long. It was only like a 20-mile section or something.
Dude, that's the best excuse for not having a pacer I've ever heard. It's going to make you complain. I love that. Dude, that's so great. What was that first 100-miler like at Western States? That's an epic first 100-miler, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. I mean, and when I look back now, like, I was eating Cheez-Its and chips and like junk and candy and M&Ms, and I'm way more dialed now, but back then I was overeating per hour. You can't really digest more than 300 calories an hour when you're running. So, anything more than that, you're like, it's just going to sit in your gut like a rock. And I remember that, like the last 50K, my stomach was just kind of off. And I didn't really know what I was doing. Luckily, I had a couple of mentors in the sport that were in their 40s that lived in Bend, Oregon, and they kind of took me under their wings and taught me a bunch of stuff. Like, they taught me about Succeed caps, electrolyte pills, taking electrolyte pills and then drinking, and handhelds and all that kind of stuff. Back then, there weren't really any race vests yet. It was just all handhelds mainly.
Oh, wow.
And I mean, all the packs were like heavy, they're big, bulky, like packs that came from backpacking technology, right? And so they weren't light, and they were kind of bulky and not that comfortable. So we always just did handhelds, with the strap across your hand, and 2 handhelds, and then maybe a little fanny pack, like a little minimalist one, or just tying like a jacket around your waist, in case it rained. It was pretty simple. But yeah, I mean, that first one was, I was just trying to figure him out. That first 3 seasons, I just was like, I didn't really care about I just cared about finishing. I didn't care about like placing. I wasn't trying to race them. But first Western States, I hiked every hill. I didn't like run any hills. I hiked from the bottom of a hill to the top. I hiked. I didn't try to run any little low grade sections or anything. So, it did okay. I did okay, but I definitely made a lot of mistakes.
That sounds like my kind of race right there. Hiking all the hills.
Yeah, exactly.
What percentage of, like, let's say Bighorn, just because I know that course now, like, what percentage of Bighorn would you say you run versus hike? Do you hike any of it now? I mean, I would assume you have to run or hike a little bit of it, right?
For sure. Yeah, the wall and the hall, you definitely hike those. Yeah. But I had poles and I was hiking it hard. Probably like if you look at like going up to the turnaround at Jaws, what you run down in the 50, that long climb, there's a lot of like low grade. I ran a lot of that stuff, probably 60% of the climb, 70% of the climb, I would say you run at something like Bighorn. There's a lot of short little hike breaks. If the terrain kicks up in front of you, you'd hike that little section, and then if it mellows out again, you're running it again.
Do you, I know Mike McKnight was telling me that he goes a lot off of like heart rate. So like, I think he was something like on his watch, he'll just have like heart rate, time, and mileage. I think I'm remembering that right. But is that something you kind of do, or do you really just stick to like the paces, or are you like really going off of feel, heart rate, that kind of thing? Or what's your
I've done heart rate way back. Before GPS watches, I had a Polar set up with a chest strap. I did it at Bighorn one year, and by 60 miles in, I was stripping that thing off because it was like rubbing and weird. And I was just like, I never did heart rate again after that race. I did it in some training, and I do it in the winter time when I was in base training. I'd use heart rate, but I mainly, after a while, you learn where kind of the feel is. And now we have the optical, and my Garmin's pretty accurate when I like test it against my like artery, and to check it to see if it's correct. And sometimes they're off a little bit, if they lose connection with your skin, they'll get off, but they're fairly accurate. So I can look at heart rate, but I only glance at it occasionally. I mainly go by RPE, so like rate of perceived exertion. So I'm just trying to stay appropriate on like what I feel like, and then stick to that.
How many hundreds have you done now?
50.
50 hundreds. 50 on the dot was Bighorn, or was it Hard Rock was the 50th?
Yeah, Hard Rock was number 50, and I've got 2 more. I'm doing finishing up the Rocky Mountain Slams, so I have Wasatch and Bear in September, 3 weeks apart. So that'll be 52. That was the whole goal this year, was to do 600s to get 52 finishes, because I just turned 52 a couple weeks ago.
Dude, that's so incredible. Out of all of the hundreds that you've done, or races in general, could be the 200s or anything else, like what's been the most memorable one for you?
Ooh, the most memorable, there's a couple that come to mind. Or probably it's hard when you've done that many. You've had these weird you've had weird experiences, and like, so San Diego 100 in 2013, I ran into a mountain lion at mile 97.
Oh,
and
gosh.
And had a face off kind of with a mountain lion. Like, it was like 20 yards, and it's crouched down in tall grass, and you could just see its head and glowing eyes. And that was a very intense moment. So that's very memorable. It was very intense. Luckily, that was one of those times I had a buddy, my buddy Jesse Haynes, had jumped in the last 20 miles, and we had a great time. We chased a skunk for a quarter mile down the trail. We saw a tarantula go into its hole, like under our headlamp. It was really cool. And then we had that mountain lion experience where we faced off this mountain lion. So I was glad to have him with me in that moment. So that's one. Another one would be like, Ultra Fjord in Patagonia, Chile was a very memorable one because it was such a hard race. It just took there's like 6 major river crossings. One was like armpit deep in the middle of the night with a rope line. There was a glacier we had to cross with crevasses. Wild bulls. So they have wild cattle that have gotten away from herds and then are just in the bush, like running around. And every once in a while you'd be like, you're in this gnarly canyon, like drainage, and you're like, that was a cattle pie, You're like, that's a cow pie right there, man, a huge one. And then I heard this crashing, and this big, have you ever seen I can't think what breed it is, but they're they're kind of orange, red, with like white spots on them, or white faces. Herefords, I think those are. So anyway, big Hereford bull, they're full feral, muddy, gnarly looking, and they're gigantic. They're like 2,000 pounds. They're as big as a buffalo. And, he goes crashing down across this creek and like takes off. As soon as he saw me, he was out of there like a wild animal, And so that was a super memorable one. There was like, I got trench foot during that race. It was 108 miles. It was gnarly. It was super gnarly. It started at midnight. So I had to be out 2 nights. Oh
my gosh.
That one's a very memorable one. I got stuck in a lightning storm in American Basin in 2014 at Hard Rock with if anybody's familiar with Coach Jason Coop for CTS. Coop and I got pinned down in American Basin right after dark before you go over the 14er. And lightning was flash booming all around us, hitting the ground everywhere around us. We were hunkered down. We were above tree line. We were stuck in a basin. So you come over a 13,000 foot ridge down into the basin, and then you go through and up by this lake, and then you climb over the 14er. So you're stuck in this basin. There's no escape route. There's no place to hide out. We were next to this slabby kind of boulder or rock and just hanging out, being poured on for like, I think 70 minutes. Ended up stopping in the middle of the race. Kaburagi from Japan, who's a North Face athlete, who's the race director for Mount Fuji, Ultra Trail Mount Fuji. He shows up with his pacer, which was a dude I know, Justin Angle. And then Diana Finkel was the women's leader, and she showed up with her pacer. So we had this little like powwow, pouring down rain, flash booming all around us, and we have to wait this storm out to go over the summit because it came and hit the summit, and we have to go over the summit. So we had to wait for the lightning storm to like move off the summit, and when it finally did enough to where we thought we could go, I got to the top. I was the first one over the top of our group, and as I was coming off the top, you have to run this like 40-yard section before you go off this knife ridge. It drops down like all these stair-steppy stuff on this really rocky knife ridge, and I just coming off the top and to run this 40 yards to the edge, and the lightning, it's dark, and the lightning strikes the point that I'm heading towards. Like puts me on the ground, hands and knees automatically, don't even have to think about it. Like put me on the ground, and then I jumped up and like bent over, ran as hard as I could, and hucked off that edge. It was pretty sketchy. Oh my god! So those are a couple of the memorable stories. Yeah,
that's amazing, man. You spend enough time in the mountains, you'll see some crazy shit, dude. you spent plenty of time in the mountains, I think.
Yeah, wild. And it's always at night. Like the crazy stories come from the night sections of these like wilder hundreds.
Of course. Have you had any hallucinations during any of these races?
Only in the 240.
Okay.
Hundreds, not really. I think if you take care of yourself, you're hydrated, you're taking care of yourself. You know, you're strategically taking caffeine at night to keep you alert. One night out's not a big deal. It's the second night out that really starts to get to you, when sleep deprivation really starts to catch up. And I was seeing weird things by day 3. I finished on day 3 at Moab. And so, third day. So 2 nights out, 3 days of running. And on the third day, like I was having weird things where shadows were things for a second until I stared at them for a minute. So it wasn't like true crazy hallucinations, but they were like, one point, like I'll give you an example. I swear, and it was just the shadow of 2 trees and like the shadow cast between them with the sun. I glanced at it almost out of peripheral as we were running down this gravel road, and I had a pacer with me. And I swear there was a person standing there with a zoom lens camera, like taking photos. And I'm like, so I even for a second thought about like, okay, is my form good, for the photo? and this is like 210 miles in or something, and like, yeah, okay. And then, and so I like, right when I started to think about like my form, I glanced at the spot again and realized it's just the shadow between 2 trees. So it's just the fatigue is so deep, but I have some good stories from like athletes I've coached and friends I've known that run 200s, that hallucinations come out in the 200s because they're, some of the middle of the packers even, or people who are going to run a decent time are going to be in the top 10, for example. They're going to be out 3 nights minimum, right? Mm-hmm. And so by the third night, you're having really, if you don't manage your sleep strategy, you will hallucinate at some point if you aren't managing that part. Now, guys who are managing it do pretty well. And they're just having like, their eyes will play tricks on them, like, oh, that stump looked like a bear for a second, or whatever. But I've had a couple athletes who, before they coached with me, did a 200 and didn't have a sleep strategy and tried to push through the whole race with no sleeping. Jeez. And at Moab one year, one of my athletes, he probably won't mind me telling this, but he definitely thought his wife paced him the last 18 miles, and he came into the like 218, I think 222, somewhere in there. He comes into this aid station. He's just like, it's the Porcupine Rim aid station at Moab, and he was just like, it's the last aid station. He's just like, and then it's 18 to go, and he wanted to sleep. He didn't really know anything about 200s. He didn't know how to plan for them. He was new to them, and so he was just coming in there, and his wife's really competitive, and so she was like, no, we're like 18 miles from the finish. Let's go get this thing done. And so he stumbles out of there without napping. So he hasn't slept at all. So he ends up literally thinking she's a witch. He's like, I know who you are. And he's faster than her, even after 220 miles. He's running ahead of her, looking over his shoulder, like, you're a witch. I know who you are, And she's like, what the heck? And he's freaking out. He ends up getting into kind of like, if you go to Porcupine Rim, it goes down into these like sandstone formations, and there's a bunch of overhangs and kind of like pseudo caves or alcoves. He got into one of those and wouldn't come out. So she's standing on the trail trying to coax him out, and he won't come out. He's like, I'm not coming out. Well, and then one of my friends from Logan, Utah, is in the race too. Him and his pacer show up, and he comes on the scene with this woman trying to coax a guy out from a cave, and he's like, what is going on? And she's like, I don't know. He's just like freaking out. He's like hallucinating. And so he goes, hey buddy, I got a peanut butter cookie. You want a peanut butter cookie? And he holds out a peanut butter cookie, and he goes, you got a peanut butter cookie? I'm coming out. And he comes out for a peanut butter cookie, and they get him. This guy, my buddy, stays with them. I won't name names so he doesn't get incriminated, but he ends up getting him to the finish line. They become good friends. The next time he does Moab, my buddy paces him. And he had a sleep strategy because I was coaching him by then. So he didn't hallucinate that time. But I mean, I had another friend that hallucinated and thought a woman was screaming in the middle of the night and left the course to go help this woman. And they saw on his tracker that he'd left the course. So they sent a volunteer to deal with him and get him back on course. And they had to play along with his hallucination. They said, no, we sent someone to get the woman. She's okay. Because he was freaked out. He's like, the woman needs help. And so they got him back on course and got him to the next aid station so he could sleep. And they made him sleep for like 5 hours or something before he could continue.
Holy cow.
Yeah. I mean, it's real in the long stuff. The 200s really bring it out.
That is so crazy. I mean, I've heard of like, Courtney DeWalter's stories of her hallucinations. It's always something like playful and like kind of funny, but like some of those, like, I mean, it could like make you do some stuff. Like, I don't know, might make you walk off a cliff or something if you're not paying attention, or like you don't have somebody there to help you.
It really is sketchy. That's why these 200s need a sleep strategy every night, especially if you're going to be out for 3 or 4 nights, like the middle of the back of the pack is. They are out for so long and so much sleep deprivation. We actually recommend at least an hour and a half nap every night, as a minimum starting point. So they're functioning. You're tricking the body in the middle of every night. Somewhere in the middle of the night, take an hour and a half nap. That'll be one REM cycle about, and you get a REM cycle in, and then it tricks the body into being kind of somewhat alert. And if you can do that every night, you'll probably be okay.
When you set when you did Moab, you set the course record, correct?
Yes.
Is that still the standing course record?
Yeah, it's the standard course record. There's 2 times that are faster than mine. Mike McKnight and this other guy trying to think where he's from. The year it was a snow course and they didn't go up in the LaSalle's. So it was a way faster course. It's a year I paced him. So I've seen that section he ran and the section that's on the legit course, and it's not the same. It's not even close to the same. So I don't know whether, I mean, I know that like Candace, she owns Destination Trails. She even said like this, we consider this the course record, the standard course record, because that other course is faster. So because it goes down, it's lower altitude, it's not as technical, there's not as much climbing in it, so it's more of a traverse. But
okay, but when you set that course record, did you sleep? Did you do that like 90 minutes for the first?
I didn't do 90 minutes. I was playing around with like dirt naps the first 40 hours, and then I had a planned sleep at like 160. And then I needed another one at 200, like 15 minutes. So I think I slept a total with dirt naps of about an hour and 10 max for that. But I was only out 2 nights. I wasn't out 3. I finished on the 3rd afternoon. So I think it just depends on strategy and Now, one of the things we're playing around with, like I coach Mike and Sarah Ostazuski, who won Cocodona this last year. We're playing around with early sleep strategies, so sleeping earlier, like before you would get into race mode up front, because race mode keeps you awake, it keeps you engaged. But if you haven't slept up until that point, then you're kind of on fumes. So it's really hard to keep outputting when you haven't slept. So if you bank sleep the first night, maybe a little bit the second night, then you should be good to the finish with maybe a couple of dirt naps.
Was that was?
Front,
Go ahead.
Go ahead. Oh, I was going to say the front. I think the front of the pack. There's a lot of wisdom. There's a lot of people out there that try to go like 36 to 40 hours before they sleep for the first time and skip the whole first night like you would in 100. I'm still not convinced that's the right strategy as a coach. And being a person who's done one and coached a ton of people, I think you do better if you sleep early and bank sleep and then not worry about it as much in the last 100 miles or 100K. If you can get the last 60, throw down the last 60 miles of the race and get into race mode where you're either catching people or someone's right on your neck, breathing down your neck, then I think you can stay way more alert and perform better because you've already banked the sleep and you don't really need it that last 60 miles, unless you needed like a 5-minute dirt nap to just bring you back around a second,
Right. Yeah, it's probably kind of this balance of like taking the time to sleep, but how much do you take so that you're not losing out on race time? Because that's where people can pass you, get ahead of you. So it's probably like that very fine balance. And it seems like 200s are still relatively new enough that like there isn't a for sure set strategy, but it sounds like you guys are kind of starting to figure that out, right?
Yeah, we're trying to still figure these things out, man. They're just not very old. They've been around not that long, So I think that because they're new, it's really like kind of like what ultras were 20 years ago. We didn't even, for like 100 milers, I guess. We didn't really know how to train for them or what we were doing. And now we're starting to get some strategies. There's different strategies and we're testing them all out. And, I luckily am fortunate enough to coach Mike McKnight, who's done a ton of them. And I coach Wes Rittner, who's done like 15 200s, and he's always up there in like, top 3 or 4 in the race. And so he's in his, mid 50s. And so he, between those two guys and Sarah, like we've really been able to like kind of put together, like for the front of the pack, put together a more like solid strategy that I think kind of actually falls outside of what the common strategy is.
Interesting. Yeah, it's I keep hearing 200 is the new 100. I'm sure you've heard that as well. It's like the slogan for destination trails. it's like I don't know where it's going to go from there.
It's a good marketing line for destination trails for sure. But man, they are different. They're a different beast and they're cool and they're a harder nut to crack because there's way more moving parts. There's way more like chance for things to go off the rails, because of sleep deprivation. And then just generally being out for that long, like blisters, bruised metatarsals, whatever, sore feet, you just don't know what your body specifically is going to deal with, right? It might not ever pop up in 100, in 200 it does.
I definitely want to talk about strength training with you. And it seems like for these mountainous races and really the longer the race, the more important role strength training plays. Have you always been, I mean, you kind of mentioned it earlier, I guess, like you've always been into this cross training thing. Have you always been like super intentional with strength training? Because I know it's a huge part of your routine now.
I wasn't very intentional in my 20s, or I should say my late 20s. I was chasing a graphic design career, working for an advertising agency. I didn't make a ton of money. I couldn't avoid to go to the gym. I was not in college anymore, so I didn't have access to any kind of gym setting, And I ended up starting to lift weights again. I took maybe a 2 or 3, 4 year hiatus in my late 20s of lifting regularly. And then I started rock climbing, and then there was a gym set up with dumbbells and stuff like that at the gym. So I started lifting again and kind of re-fell in love. I'd always lifted weights since 8th grade. We were on the Nebraska strength training, the 80s football, Nebraska Cornhuskers football team's strength training program, which was kind of like the strength training program that all football programs eventually kind of emulated. but they were like the early adopters of like very strategic strength training. Like, every 6 weeks, every 6 or 8 weeks, you did a 1 rep max on everything, and then you got a new workout for 6 weeks, and you did the whole thing over again. And you lifted 4 days a week. You lifted, every body part kind of twice a week, every other day, right? And so it was breaking up body parts. So that's what I was trained on all through high school. I lifted, 4 days a week, year round. And then I continued that habit became a lifestyle habit. So when I went to college, I just kept doing the same kind of lifting. And so I kept doing this kind of bodybuilding style strength training all the way through college. And then when I got in my career, I kind of let it go. And then I got back into it in my early 30s, around 30. I started lifting again. And then by my 40s, I had kind of honed it into, I tried, if you're familiar with P90X and P90X3, all the Beachbody stuff that was like DVDs and home workouts.
Dude, those are great.
Dumbbells. What's that?
I love P90X, dude. Those are great.
Yeah, right? So like one of my favorites was P90X3. It was like 30-minute strength workouts. That got me thinking like, I'm busy. I've got 3 kids. I've got a graphic design business and I'm trying to train and I need to do strength training. So how do I incorporate this? I need a really time efficient. So I kind of used that P90X model and came up with my own kind of superset upper body, lower body, then upper body, lower body exercise with dumbbells, then a core workout, then a core exercise, then an upper body, lower body, core exercise. And I did 7 things, 3 sets and a minute each. So it was like a 21-minute workout. So it was like 45 seconds on, 15 seconds to switch. And that's kind of what, and if you go to Ultra Running Magazine's YouTube channel, you can Google Jeff Browning Tough 21 and you'll find that strength workout, the base one that I used to use. I have more variations of it now that are more like 24-minute workouts and like 21-minute workout, 24. They've kind of evolved now for me. So I'm about 30 minutes in the gym when I go 3 days a week now. And so it's that kind of workout though. It's upper body, lower body, superset dumbbells. And then I usually do some kind of bench workout with like flies and like leg raises or bicycles with like alternating press, stuff like that. So I'm mixing in core still, and planks and all that kind of stuff. So I still do all that. But like I said, for years I did 2 days a week. Now I do 3 days a week now that I'm in my 50s. And I've got a routine and I've got a gym that's 5 minutes from my house. So I do more gym workouts now than I used to. But for years I just did home workouts just with dumbbells, 15 to 25 minute workouts 2 or 3 days a week, depending on what type of season I was in. And I always do a pretty harder session, what I call periodization phase of strength in the off season, where I was like really focusing on spending more time in the gym, doing heavier stuff for maybe 2 months, 3 months when I was like in lower volume phase, just trying to get through the winter to give me something to do inside.
Right now you're doing 3 days a week, about 30 minutes, and you're following that same structure.
Yeah, same structure of upper body, lower body, supersetted with dumbbells, So like, for example, like deadlift, upright row press, right? So you go do a deadlift, bring it up to here, and then over your head, and then back down, and you're controlling the weight all the time. So never like dropping weight. 70% of strength gain is in the lowering, the eccentric movement, the lowering of the weight.
Right.
When you see all the muscle heads at the gym like dropping their weights and stuff, you're like, dude, you're like leaving a lot on the table, man. Just to push that extra little bit of weight because of your ego. Like, back off 20 pounds and control the weight, right? So I always laugh at that because I never say anything, but I always like there's a chuckle inside my head at the ego in the gym with heavy weights when they can't even get full extension because it's too heavy, and you're just like, man, just back off like 20 pounds and like you get full extension and then lower it really controlled, or whatever. But that's the coach in me, critiquing.
No, I love that. It sounds like you're just super, super efficient and intentional. With all of your training, but especially with the strength training stuff too. It's like, I think most runners, it seems like it's kind of shifting, especially within ultras, because people understand like how much power and strength you need for the mountains. But it seems like there's a shift of like more runners adopting strength training plans and people becoming more aware of it, which is cool. But I love that it's just like 3 times 30 minutes a week. Like it's so simple, really. It's like, who doesn't have an extra 90 minutes a week? And it's like that 90 minutes a week makes a huge difference, I'm sure, right?
It makes a huge difference, and it's very consolidated. Like the way I do it, I'm moving the whole time. Like I watch other guys in the gym. To my 9 exercises times 3, right? Times 3 sets. Like I'm doing so much more work for guys who are like, they might have done 2 exercises in my 27 minutes or whatever. And I'm out. Then I'm out. I'm like back on my bike riding home, And so, but I've done tons of work in that sandwich time, 20 to 30 minutes. I'm like knocking out a ton of work, right? At minimum 21 exercises or 21 moves minimum. And if you count the superset, you're doing upper body and lower body, you can take that times 2. Right? So you're getting a ton of work in a short amount of time. And that's where I've always kind of approached strength training. I don't want to spend 2 hours in the gym, walking around from exercise machine to exercise machine, or like taking weights on and off, and plates on and off of a bench, or plates on and off some other exercise. I go to a couple of machines and then I do dumbbell work. And once a week it's heavier, where I do, increase the weight and descending sets, so like powerlifting type sets. I do it at the beginning of the week, and then the other 2 days are more just my one weight going through the range of motion. So for example, if my starting weight is 20-pound dumbbells on my powerlifting sets on say at the beginning of the week, the other 2 days would be the starting weight. Like just doing 20, like today I just did 20s. Because I'm going into my long run weekend, and I got a volume weekend this Friday, Saturday. I got to do 2 big workouts. I'm not doing heavy weight, but I'm still working on range of motion under a load. So even if it's a lighter load. And so I am getting some kind of a cardio workout from that as well, just because I'm not stopping. I'm moving from exercise to exercise with maybe 10 seconds in between each one. And then I'm moving again, for 10 reps. So or I do 12, 10, 8 or something like that.
Interesting. Yeah, I was just going to ask the rep scheme. So 12, 10, 8. Do you ever go anything outside of that? Like, do you ever now go for like a 1 rep max or 3 rep max or anything like that?
Every once in a while I'll go for heavier stuff, but like when I do the powerlifting sets, I'll do like 10 or 12 as the warm up, and then I'll do like 6-4 or 6-3 with heavier, and going heavier with each one. I like those. I like to do that, especially in the off season. I really work on that, like heavier. But then the other 2 days are more, I kind of see those as more like maintenance, range of motion. You're working on mobility and range of motion. I'm trying to like, if I'm doing curls, like even if I'm doing curls, I'm making sure that I'm fully extending my arms, and then I'm fully coming all the way to the max range of motion and controlling the weight on the lowering. Right, so you're really getting a lot of bang for your buck for a little lighter weight when you control the weight.
Right, that totally makes sense. Especially like I'm curious to know what your leg days look like what leg exercises you do, because I've been incorporating a lot more like Bulgarian split squats to really get that like eccentric movement of the quad for like the downhill aspect.
Yeah.
What are your leg day exercises look like?
I usually am doing some like when I do the heavier day, I'll do squats, like squat rack. I'll do deadlifts, or like the trap bar, you stand in the middle of. Mm-hmm. And then I do deep forward knee lunges, like knees over toes guy.
Yep.
His move, only I've worked up to using dumbbells and not having my foot elevated, so now I can like really drive my knee out over my toe, have good ankle flexion. And I do it where I superset it with a single overhead press. So like have dumbbells, I'll go down into the forward knee lunge. I'll come back up where your legs are split, and I'll stand with it fully engaged, engaging the back glute on that side, and then doing an overhead press. So you have to like, try to balance because your legs are split. And then I'll go back down into it, and then I'll do the other side same way. So I'm working supersetting a lot. And I do dumbbells a lot. I just like dumbbells because, one, they're quick, and you can kind of set up your own little station with a bench. Like I take one of the older benches, the single bench that doesn't go up and down, and I just pick it up and move it to another part of the gym where there's more room and more space. And I'm kind of out of like where the dumbbell rack is and all the benches are. And so I can go over by myself and just kind of stay over there for 30 minutes and have a little circuit going, take a couple of dumbbells over there and just work, different weights and like really focus on, and I really focus on engagement. So I think a lot of things you see in the gym is you see people doing like half range, like 3/4 range of motion, and all kinds of stuff, where I'm trying to work on full range of motion and feeling like, when you get to the top of a deadlift or a squat, do you stop, squeeze your glutes fully flexed, which tucks your hips under you, and then engage your core too before you start down to the next movement, right? You're not just going, up and down, up and down. You're going down, coming back up and squeezing, driving your shoulders back. So so your shoulder blades are slightly pinched, and driving your shoulders back near your ears. So you don't have that forward, head posture thing that everybody does because we're sitting at computers and driving. So like really working on like your posture and engagement on every move. So moves are intentional. And that's what I like about dumbbells, because you're using your whole body, right? If you're doing upper body, lower body superset, you have to use the whole body. You're using your core, you're using your glutes, you're squeezing your glutes. So I don't worry about working super heavy, except every once in a while. When I'm in like off phases, I'll do some heavier days. And then when I'm back into heavy training, volume, endurance training, then I'm doing more of this dumbbell type work.
Okay, I love that. I'm definitely gonna steal some of these ideas because it sounds again like it's efficient, it's intentional, and you're doing very like beneficial work without having to waste a bunch of time. And I love the idea of just like using kettlebells or dumbbells and something that's like just way easier and faster, which is nice.
Look, there's look at
go ahead.
Yeah, at some point go back to my maybe 6-8 months ago. There's a black and white video of a bunch of just little moves all pieced together in a video, in a black and white video in my garage. And I call it Tough 24. And I think I list even the exercises, but it's all, you never put down the dumbbells for like, you do 8 things times 3 sets. And so that's like pretty much the key workout I do most of the time. Some variation of that. I mix up the moves all the time just to keep it fresh. Whatever I'm in the mood for that day, I come up, like sometimes I just walk in my head and go, okay, I'm going to do these 8 exercises, But that's probably the example of what I do right now. Tough 21 is like kind of my original, but I add on to it, so it's more like 9 moves instead of 7 moves now. And I do a lot of like dumbbell work with the upper body while I'm doing core.
That's cool. It's like those functional movements where you're kind of doing everything full body. That functional stuff is huge. Would you attribute like your longevity to strength training, or what would you, if you had to pick, like, is there one thing you would pick that's like, okay, this is what's allowed me to be able to do this for so long?
It's a couple of things. It's a few things. I think strength and mobility, because I think mobility kind of like interweaves with strength, right? Range of motion exercises. I do a lot of yoga type stretching. So there's mobility mixed in with that. So I think those two things are really important because we do lose range of motion as we age, and we lose muscle mass, right? Like protein synthesis slows down after 35. You lose about an average of a pound of muscle a year if you don't do something to replace it. So it's important to have something under a load after you're 35 to maintain muscle mass. Otherwise, you're getting fatter, even by staying the same weight. So that's a tough truth to come to terms with when you're 45 or 50 and you're like, wow, I have never lifted weights. You're like, yeah, you need to. And you need to figure it out and learn the moves, and learn moves under lighter weight first. And as you learn the moves and good movement patterns, so you're not, I would caution people out there that don't just pick up weights and start lifting. Learn the moves and learn engagement movements, your feet alignment, everything. So you don't keep like some kind of muscle imbalance you already have. You're just going to strengthen that muscle imbalance. So that's one thing I've worked on for a long time is movement patterns to kind of balance everything and make sure everything is engaging. And, even when I line up, I still stop before every single time, and I twist my feet into the floor a little bit and make sure my big toes are parallel. I look down and I like, okay, everything's good. Now I start my squat, right? So I set up. So I'm always thinking about that. Even doing Bulgarian split squats, you would mention those, like making sure that you're not like reaching farther with one leg than the other when you set up, right? What if you're an inch farther in your drop, right? In your reach of that Bulgarian split squat on your left side versus your right side, then you're creating a muscle imbalance or a muscle asymmetry, right? It's not symmetry, asymmetry. So you're not balanced. So you want to be always working on balance and engagement and alignment. But I think the strength training is definitely a big one, a key one. The other one would be nutrition. I mean, hands down, nutrition's probably those two together are like performance enhancer when you're older. Animal based. I mean, I eat animal based, high protein, like 1.2 to 1.3 grams of protein per pound of body weight is what I shoot for. I'm 145 pounds, so I shoot for 160 plus grams of protein a day in 3 to 4 servings. So I'm shooting for 50 to 60 grams of protein per serving, or 40 to 60, depending on the meal. That's my priority on my plate. And then everything else, I use fruit and starches. I kind of eat a paleo style food list. So I always go for fruit and starch, like potatoes and sweet potatoes as first choice. And then vegetables next. And then, then the top of the pyramid would be like moderate foods like wine and dark chocolate and, stuff like that. Occasionally some white rice or something like that. But for 90% of the time, I'm really strict on what I eat. Try to stay away from seed oils. I stay away from grains and sugar in my everyday diet.
I love that, man. Yeah, dude, I cut out seed oils. I feel way better. I think it's like the inflammation that it causes, and I don't know what all the science is.
Yeah, because they're a polyunsaturated fat, and they're rancid by the time you consume them. And it's crazy, dude. Today, Rolling Stone just published a article online about that seed oils aren't that bad for you. And I was just like, oh my gosh. Like, stick to music, Rolling Stone. Yeah. Seriously. I was like, wow, who paid you off? Yeah, it's just, they're rancid. You know what I mean? They're an unstable they're the most unstable molecular chain of the fats, right? There's saturated fats, monounsaturated fats like avocado oil and olive oil. And then there's polyunsaturated fats, all the seed oils, right? All the seed-based oils. They have to high heat them. They're so unstable that they oxidize under heat, light, and air. Well, first, just to extract them, you have to have high heat. So there they are. They're oxidized. Now you're going to put them in a bottle with under light, under air, and now you're going to cook with them and heat them again. So by the time you eat them, they're so rancid, dude. They're not even like, your body doesn't even really recognize them. Like, it's like, what is this foreign thing you're trying to give me? So anyone who tries to tell you seed oils are good for you, like, tell them to take a hike, man. Like, go look at the molecular chain. It's unstable.
Yeah, I had a dietitian on a couple weeks ago, and I couldn't argue with her because like I don't have any credentials, but she said seed oils weren't bad, and I'm like, oh no, I didn't want to say anything because again, I'm not a dietitian, I'm not like I don't have any certifications or anything, but I'm like, I know enough, I know how to read articles, I know how to form my own opinions on things, and it sucks, man. I think that it's starting to become more well-known. I wouldn't say well-known, more.
But the dogma is ingrained.
Yeah.
The dogma is ingrained in mainstream nutrition and in the mainstream educational nutrition. As soon as I see registered dietitian, I immediately go, ooh, you're going to be stuck in your dogma. Like, you're going to be quoting all the old studies that half of them have been debunked and you don't even know they've been debunked, right? If we look at the Ansel Keys diet heart hypothesis that all the saturated fat and cholesterol causes heart disease narrative has been based on, he that has been debunked by over 70 more recent studies because we couldn't reproduce his studies because he threw out inconvenient data. He was a horrible scientist because he had his end goal already set, and then he had to throw data out to back up his theory. So like when and those, some of his stuff, his 7-country study still gets quoted in mainstream nutrition and in vegetarian circles still. And he had to throw out like 14 or 15 countries out of that study to make it a 7-country. I think it was originally like a 23-country study. And he had to throw all these countries out because they were thin, didn't have heart disease, and they ate a lot of saturated fat and animal proteins and stuff like that. Oh, it cracks me up.
That's so bad,
I think
man.
the one way, if you're in our camp, one of the things we realize is we just kind of laugh about it now. We don't even take those people seriously. Like we pass around their posts and, privately and like snicker and be like, can you believe this? Like, I can't believe they're still touting this stuff and people believe it, but you can only tell people what they're ready to hear, right? Like anyone, they're not going to make a change unless they are ready to make a change. And I've been on a long walk in nutrition. I was almost a nutrition major, ended up being a graphic designer, but I did nutrition for a little bit. Went into a nutritional program during my university years, and I'm glad I didn't, man. I feel like it's a blessing that I missed that bullet because I'd be stuck in that dogma, man. So I'm glad I learned it all like as part of my kind of long-term lifestyle path. We were vegetarians in our 20s for like 7 years, had major health issues. I lost muscle mass. I came out of college really buff from all the lifting weights and mountain biking. And then all of a sudden, 7 years later, I'm like soft and like kind of fat and like, and just looked like not fit. And I was running all the time. And I was like, something's not right here. My wife was having even worse nutritional issues because we just had our first kid and she was trying to like, we were trying to raise him vegetarian and he wasn't thriving. And so finally, like when he was 18 months old, we made a full shift to like full Whole Foods organic. And then like we did that for 12 or 13 years. And then we shifted to this kind of paleo, got rid of grains and sugar, right? So it wasn't a big shift for us because we were already eating organic. We were already eating real food. We just cut out the grains and sugar and legumes and all that kind of stuff. And man, my career, if you look at it from 2016 out, you can look at Ultra Sign Up. Like from 2016 on, my career got like a second wind after I switched my diet. Because I wasn't inflamed. I was recovering, like really fast. And I fine-tuned it over the years, and that's what Mike McKnight, I'm the one that shared it, my experience with him, and then he made the shift. Mm-hmm. We had a 5-hour van ride together one year, and we were, before I even coaching, and I was just like talking to him, and the next thing we know is like, he's like, I'm gonna do this too. After we kind of I shared my story, and he hasn't looked back either because you feel good on it. You recover really fast, and all my athletes that do it, they're like, they might go back to their old way for a while, for a season, and then they're like, dude, I gotta get off of this again. Like I'm so inflamed, and I gained weight back, and all these little things, and they're like, my knees are sore, and and now, you get them back on this and they just like, you give them some volume and they recover from it. They go to a race, they recover from it in half the time they used to. So.
Yeah, dude,
cool.
I think the recovery aspect, like, anecdotally in my experience, the recovery is insane. Like, I'm like basically never sore. Like, a year ago, even like when I was going through my first like marathon prep, I was just sore all the time because I was just like, oh, I'm running so much. I just got to eat anything and everything, eating all this processed shit, not paying attention to sugars and seed oils and stuff. I was just always sore. And now, like, I don't know, I feel fine the next day. And I'm sure you can say the same thing. The sugars too, the added sugars are so bad. Like, I'm sure you've seen like Liquid IV or like some of these like higher end or these like more popular electrolyte supplements. And it's like 70% sugar in those things. It's so bad. It's terrible.
Yeah, I actually have to coach athletes that if they're new, we have to kind of guide them through that process of like, when I say electrolytes, I'm talking about strict electrolytes, not some like sugary drink that says it's an electrolyte drink. Don't be drinking that crap because it's just going to jack your blood sugar up. And then you can't tap into fat and your body's going to say store fat in the cell. As soon as your blood sugar's way up and your pancreas is kicking out insulin, it's signaling store fat in the cell. So anyway, good stuff though, man. It's definitely can be life changing for some of my older athletes, that think their ultra running career is on the big time decline, and they show up and make a big lifestyle kind of nutrition change to kind of what we call OFM, optimized fat metabolism. So it's basically kind of a initial keto reset approach for 4 weeks, and then we go into like strategic carbohydrate use from like paleo food list. So it's like bringing back fruit and starch around effort and volume. That's basically like the quick of it. And really teaches their body to tap into onboard fat at a deeper rate. And then they aren't snacking. We're like, eat a meal, let it burn, eat a meal, let it burn. And man, they'll lose weight. All of a sudden their inflammation's way, way down. They're recovering really fast. And, and I've even had, one of the coolest ones probably is I had one athlete who was in his 60s, and he said his wife always listened into our conversation because he put me on speaker. And so she was always listening in when we were talking on our coaching calls. And after he'd done it for a while and he'd lost a bunch of weight, and he got down to like his like high school weight in his 60s, right? He was lean, wow, like back to a 6-pack in his 60s. And he was like, I didn't think I could get this lean again at my age. Like, this is awesome. Like I feel great. I got good muscle mass. And he goes like, I'm not like sitting around with this like spare tire anymore. And his wife in the background's like, thank you, Jeff Browning. Like, just because she's stoked that he's healthy and he looks good again, right? He's not walking around with a big old gut anymore. So it's really rewarding to see that evidence. And it just gives me, reassurance that I'm on the right path. And, when someone's pushing that I should be eating seed oils and they're not bad for me, I just say, okay, whatever.
Yeah, dude. And I feel like anybody that's doubting anything you're saying, it's like you've built all of this evidence through again, your longevity, like being able to do it to 52 years old and however long you're going to keep doing it for, like still winning races. And I mean, dude, you know how many 52-year-olds can go even run 100 miles, like let alone win the freaking race? It's like, it's so wild what you're doing. But I mean, when you look at it, it's really not that wild because you're just eating like real, actual food that we're supposed to be eating, not all this bullshit that everybody else is eating.
Yeah, and I mean, I always go back to this, man, just from a logical perspective. Our ancestors were hunter-gatherers, then hunter-herders, then hunter-herder farmers, meaning farming came along way later, and we used it as a famine food, meaning we stored it up for times of lean. So grains are a famine food, right? We're not supposed to eat them as a staple. We've only been eating them as a staple for maybe 100 years, and look at our health. It's horrible, right? We eat more seed oils than we've ever eaten. We eat more grains than we've ever eaten, and more vegetables than we've ever eaten. We used to only eat vegetables in season, and now we're all of a sudden like we're obese, and 89% of the population is metabolically compromised or overweight. It's like of the U.S. at least. So it just shows you like this isn't the path that we're really genetically coded to do. And it's really logic. Like, look at the animal kingdom. Predators have their eyes in the front of their head. Prey have them on the side. If we were supposed to eat a ton of vegetables, our eyes would be on the side of our head. They are not. And our GI tract is the most... This is one interesting one I did. If you ever want to do a rabbit trail, go into like how our GI tract is designed. It's probably the most like a carrion bird, like a buzzard. So we're supposed to eat fermented meat, meaning cooked meat. And so lightly cooked meat, that's how we're supposed to eat. We're, probably a little raw at times, but mostly slightly cooked or dehydrated or sun-baked or whatever, right? If you take away technology, that's really where we're supposed to come from. And if anybody, I grew up hunting. If you ever try, and I've grown a garden, and if you try to go grow a garden and you try to go hunt, it's easier to go, you're going to get a lot more bang for your buck for your effort to go hunt. Because I can go feed my entire family for a while with one elk, right? Or one deer. But if I go like try to grow vegetables, I've got to have vegetables constantly, right? You just got to eat so many vegetables just to get enough. And then you got all these defense. One of the things I love about the carnivore movement is that it's brought attention and brought up the conversation that we never were having about anti-nutrients and defense chemicals in vegetables. We've always looked at vegetables as this like super clean, great for you thing, but when you understand them from a defense mechanism, right? If they're rooted in the ground and they can't run away from a predator like a elk or a deer or a bison, right? Or a human who's gathering them and cutting it. Like if it can't run away from that, it has to have some kind of defense chemical to keep it from being eaten into extinction. So that defense chemical is chemicals like toxins in its seed, toxins in certain parts of the plant, in its leaves, oxalates, lectins, phytic acid, right? All these things that wreak havoc in our gut and block absorption of certain nutrients in our gut, like all these kind of things that we weren't really talking about and aren't really talked about in the mainstream nutritional circles. You never hear about that. They only hear about it in ancestral circles when we start like actually digging into the details and going, wait, okay, this logically makes sense. They have to have a defense. What's their defense? They can't run away. They're not fleet of foot. They don't have a nose. They don't have ears. They don't have eyes on the side of their head. They can't run away. They have to have chemicals, and that's how they keep from being eaten into extinction. So I think it makes a lot of sense to eat ancestral, to eat more of a paleo style of food list. It doesn't have to be strict. Like I teach athletes 80-20 rule, 90-10 rule. 2 to 4 meals a week. You're out with friends, don't worry about it. Try to eat healthy if you can. Some people are going to be mentally more strict, and some people are going to need a little more leeway just to do it normal, like all the time. And so that's how I approach life too. I'm not hardcore. I have been in a hardcore phase in my life, at times, in little seasons where I was like super strict and I never cheated. And then there's other times where I'm just like, you know what? I'm not going to worry about like eating out once a week or twice a week, and I know I'm going to have some seed oils on that stupid meal, but I'll just take some extra fish oil to bind with it and bind with those omega-6s and hopefully get rid of it quicker than 2 years. So
have you read *Sapiens* by Naval? It's Naval.
I have not.
Dude, I would highly recommend it. There's a whole section there about the agricultural revolution, and he says the agricultural revolution was like the single worst thing that's ever happened to human health because of what you just described of like feeding everybody famine food, so then we can excel our populations, feed more people with just this like empty, shitty calories essentially.
Well, and you know what else is kind of the most. What's kind of the craziest aspect of that, me coming from like an agricultural background, I've thought about this a lot, that we have taken those grains, where do we produce those grains? We grow them on either a natural wetland or a natural grassland, and most of it's in a natural grassland. Well, what was on that grassland? Gigantic herds. There were estimated 50 to 80 million bison in North America alone. And there's not even that many cattle in circulation today in North America. So and that doesn't count elk, antelope, deer, right? All the other herbivores. So our planet natural system is gigantic herds on billions of acres of grass. But we've torn those grasslands up. We've lost 70% of our natural grasslands to monoculture, corn, soybeans, wheat, all the seed oils, or vegetables are grown that way now in a monoculture model. It's all one plant on millions of acres. And that's not a sustainable system. They till it twice a year. So when I grew up in this, man, I understand it from like where our food comes from. And you kill lots of animals. You just don't kill big animals. You kill lots of little animals, millions and millions and millions of little tiny animals, little mammals. You tear up their burrows because you dig down in the dirt like 12 to 18 inches when you till the ground after a harvest. So you disrupt those animals 3 times a year in most monoculture models. So you're either displacing them or you're tearing up their dens and where they live. But a natural grassland, what do? You don't do anything. The herbivores go through and mow it down with their mouth, They convert all that in their multi-chambered stomach, all that fiber and nutrients out of the grass into their muscle meat, and then we're the predator that eats them. Like, that's the natural cycle, people. And like, until people get a hold of that and understand that they're just being used by big ag and all those industries that take all those grains and highly process them and put them in the middle aisles of the grocery store for you to be addicted to. Like, until people get a hold of that and understand that they're being used like a pawn, I think we're destined to just be our little small following of people who are just passing this information around to each other one-on-one and going, yeah, don't eat that way. If you want longevity, don't eat that way, So...
Yeah, dude, that's so crazy. The whole monoculture thing is so wild. And I've heard that, I'm sure you know this too, but it's like every year that goes by, every harvest, they become less and less nutrient dense. The soil becomes worse and worse, less like the nitrates and stuff become less concentrated. And so it's like over time, like you're not even gonna be able to grow anything except for like this artificial shit that they figure out how to grow.
Well, this is a very interesting point.
We could talk about this whole seed oil thing and nutrition stuff forever, I feel like.
So wait, I got to make one more point, and then I'll shut up. I think the one thing that's really interesting is to remember that if you're going to grow vegetables, if anybody's ever grown a garden, you have to improve the soil. And there's only one way there's two ways to improve the soil. You have to fertilize it. It's either like chemical fertilizer, which is petroleum based, which everyone can agree that's not a good idea, right? The second one is organic, and organic is not just manure, it's blood, bone, and manure. We have to use animals as part of the cycle. If we don't use cycle, then we can't grow vegetables. We can't grow grains without fertilizer. Otherwise, the soil degrades, and literally your seeds will not sprout in the ground by season 3 if you don't improve the soil every year. Any gardener knows this. You have to use fertilizer. And so you have to use animals. We're part of the circle. And once we get a hold of that, then you can like free your mind from the propaganda machine.
I love it, dude. We're letting the people know, man. You're letting the people know. I hope that all the people listening to this can take this and apply it and keep spreading the knowledge and get rid of all these, people that are pushing all the other bull crap that's out there. I love it. Well, I did want to ask you one more thing about like your nutrition when it comes to racing and running. How do you do like supplements? Do you do? I know you said like Redmond's Relight. Do you do like gels, endurance powders? Like, what does your race and training nutrition look like?
And now, after being on my soapbox about processed foods, processed carbohydrates for racing work. And that's where they have a place. That's why I say there is a place for some of this that just shouldn't be a staple in our diet, right? So, long runs, races, any efforts over 2 hours should be simple carbs, 300 calories an hour, whatever works for you, whether it's gels, whether it's powders and drinks, you need electrolytes mixed in there. That's what I race on. I race on Tailwind, and gels and a little bit of like mashed potatoes and potato chips and stuff like that. So that's the only time that I find that the processed, like kind of technical nutrition, I guess, is appropriate. It's convenient. It's, shelf stable for a while. You can have it in drop bags. It's easy to carry around and travel with. So you have to use those products, but I use them sparingly, right? It's only going to be on my long run and it's only going to be on my races. And so when you look at like, if your diet's solid 95% of the time, that is going to be a blip on your metabolic system. I do a mix of GU, honey stinger. I've used Martin gels. I kind of mix it up. Like I don't really, Tailwind's my main baseline powder. That's what I do mostly. And then I just strategically add some gels here and there. Maybe in a 100-miler, 10 or 12 gels total, maybe 14. But most of it's liquid calories, IV dripping, liquid sipping all the time with electrolytes and Tailwind, just a powdered, carbohydrate.
Nice. Dude, this has been a really fun, very informative podcast. I love hearing your story, getting to know you more, getting to chat. Tell the people about seed oils. I love it, man. What's like your next? I know you said you got a couple more hundreds this year, but I really want to know like what is Jeff's like big plan? What's his ultimate goal for the next like decade or for the rest of your life even?
For me now, I'm moving into more of a like I've been racking up these kind of career stats that I've kind of my own personal goals. One was like to get 52 finishes this year. I'm doing Cocodona 250 next year, so my second 200 plus race in my backyard, finishes in Flagstaff, so I'm stoked about that. Focusing on that and figuring that out a little more and trying to perform at that distance. I think the other thing I'm really just in general, I still love hundreds. I still love racing. I'm kind of in this zone where I'm like, well, how long does this nutrition and height and strength training and mobility work? How long does it give me, right? So at this point, it's a question mark. Like, I'm just trying to show like, hey, if you do the little things and you kind of fine tune diet and strength and all the other things besides running, like how long can you perform? I don't know. I have no idea. I'm right now I'm still very motivated to train hard. I love my training ground. I still like do my speed work. I still do hard hills. I still get in the weight room. I still like dial in my nutrition, eat a ton of animal protein, and I really enjoy it. And I just want to see where it goes. What's that mean? I don't know. We'll see. Like at some point I'll slow down enough that ultras become social and I'll enjoy the aid stations and I'll sit, and I'll have a bigger pack and probably poles and like compression socks and everything. But for now, I'll just roll with it and have fun and see where it takes me. I like the unknown about it.
I love that, man. Well, dude, I feel like we could just sit here and talk for a couple more hours. We might have to do like a part 2 of this, like in a few months or something, because there's so many things I still want to ask you. But I know you're a busy guy.
Man, make a list and we'll have a part 2. I'm good with that.
Let's do it, man. This is fun, dude. I know you're a busy guy with family and training and everything else going on in your life. So I appreciate you taking the time to chat. Where's the best place for people to find you and connect with you?
Instagram, Go Bronco Billy, and my coaching athlete website is gobroncobilly.com. So you can check me out there.
I love it. Oh, one more question. Now that you said that, where does the nickname Bronco Billy come from?
When I was a climber in the 90s, I had a buddy who was from Wyoming, and he turned me on to saying we used the term giddy up anytime for anything, whether it was like, oh, you're thinking about making this move and it's hard and you're not saying like giddy up, man, or if you hit something really hard and you made it, you were like giddy up. And so we used that a lot. When I moved to Bend and I started ultra running, a buddy of mine and I who trained together a lot, he was like Jason Moyer. He claimed to be from the Berserker tribe. He was of Norse descent. He looked like a Viking. And kind of blondish red beard and square jaw. And I would call him Berserker. I just kind of started calling him Berserker, and because I was saying giddy up, he started calling me Bronco Billy. I don't know where he got it, but that's how it started. And then blogs got popular, and I got gobroncobilly.com a long, long time ago in like 2004, and started blogging about my races and doing race reports. And then blogs took off and got popular. And then I was an early adopter of social media, so I got all the same handles just because I was in graphic design and branding and marketing. So I, obviously I was on Facebook early, Instagram early, and I was like, oh, well, I got to get Go Bronco Billy on those too, of course. So it just kind of took on a life of its own over the years as I had success and was in this ultra running community, and some of the old timers and core people in the sport called me Bronco all the time, and it just kind of stuck. So that's where it comes from.
That's awesome, dude. I love that. Well, it's definitely you made a name for yourself with it, and all the other things you've done. So it's that's great, man. But again, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a blast, dude.
Yeah, Jeremy, thanks for having me on.
All right, we'll see you later, man. Thank you so much for tuning into the show. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a review, and share it with a friend. We'll see you in the next one.